Make your way over to the book of Philippians. We have come to the month of August, and it is still burning hot outside.
Yes.
I was in Arkansas over the weekend, and it actually got down to 70 in the daytime.
Oh, no, there was a storm. A storm came through to do that, right?
Well, but it didn't get much up above that. And then as I drove back south yesterday, the sun was going down and the temperature was going up. So, it was
I have a picture on my phone. I was in Alabama last month, 73 at like 6 p.m., but it was a storm. It was a storm.
August brings us to Philippians, our next letter, as we make our way through the letters of Paul. I hope you guys are keeping up with your Bible reading, and appreciate you jumping on the podcast with us. So it's week 1, and we want to just give folks a little bit of background to ponder as they read the book. Starting with this, you chose the chronology.
Yeah.
So why Philippians next in the sequence?
Well, it's almost certainly one of Paul's later letters. But this is going to be true, I think, of most of the letters as we get further and further on. It's going to become more dogmatic, or more difficult to be dogmatic.
Less dogmatic.
Yeah, I was going to get that out of my mouth today. More difficult to be dogmatic. We need to be less dogmatic about exactly where it was written from, exactly when. More working in ranges and possibilities, likelihoods now.
These are curiosities to us.
Yeah.
But not really critical in understanding the letter. I mean, to some degree, date gives us time period and maybe influences circumstances, but by and large,
nothing crucial is hanging on this.
These are just our curiosities to kind of know what happened when.
Well, and certainly, if nothing else, just some of those detail passages when Paul's, wants somebody to move around or bring him something or, whatever. Anyway, long story short, though, back to Philippians, most likely, quite possibly, it's not an ironclad case, probably can be reasonably read as Paul's Roman imprisonment. That comes at the end of the book of Acts. Remember, at the end of the book of Acts, he is appealed to Caesar in his trial there in Caesarea Maritima there. And so he has been shipped across the Mediterranean.
Well, taking forever to get...
Yeah, it was a couple years in Caesarea.
Yes, it was a long time.
And the shipwreck
Which
and all
is why
that.
there's some dispute about when it was written, because some believe Caesarea at least was a possibility.
Correct.
There are other possible imprisonments that he could have in mind.
And even one possibility, remember, he mentioned some other, he's been in prison a lot of times. 2 Corinthians mentions a lot of sufferings that aren't recorded in the book of Acts. So one of the other things that's even possible is that this is an imprisonment that Acts doesn't cover at all. We forget that.
Right.
So ultimately, but a reasonably decent case can be made that this is that first Roman imprisonment into the book of Acts. It certainly can be made to work chronologically. And so if that's one of the biggest reasons is Paul mentions, the Praetorian in chapter 1 there and his ability to have influence in Caesar's household.
Watch for that when you're reading chapter 1.
When you're reading chapter 1 this week. So anyways, it's not an ironclad case, but that's certainly one of the strong points. So we're probably talking something no matter what, and no matter where it was written from, though I think it's, a good case can be made for Rome. We're talking about something that's late in Paul's life, towards the end. If it's the Roman imprisonment of the book of Acts, and late chapters of Acts, we're talking something in 60 to 62, that range. And then put it in perspective, Paul's probably executed somewhere around 65, 66, maybe as late as 67. So we're getting close to the end of Paul's life. If it's earlier, it's probably not much earlier than 58, 59. So again, but that's not really going to change your reading of it, right? Those are interesting details, but it's something that's coming late in Paul's life, late in his ministry.
And so that would actually put the letter roughly a decade after Paul visited Philippi.
Right.
Yeah. So that would be during the second journey.
Right.
And so the other thing you might want to read this week, because Philippi is short. I mean, this is what?
4 chapters.
Yeah, 15-minute read.
Yeah.
Just to go through the whole thing.
Right.
So in addition to that, you might think about reading Acts 16, because that's sort of the historical setting of how things got started.
Right, that second journey.
And that was a pretty interesting time.
Yeah.
That the time spent in Philippi. In fact, there are at least 2 stories that we especially remember from that period surrounding a couple of converts there. So I think about Lydia, because when Paul first came to Philippi, that's kind of the first group he gathered with, this women who were meeting down by the river.
Right. And then, of course, the famous casting out of the spirit out of the girl that led to his imprisonment, the conversion of the jailer there in Philippi.
Conversion of the jailer, a very familiar story to us. And in fact, it's one of those rare stories in Acts where there's just it's lengthy and there's a lot of details applied to it. So if you go through the book, you kind of have these special segments, like Stephen's story gets a lot of attention. Well, the jailer story is one that is told for us in some detail, but it kind of tells you what he was dealing with there. And what would have been the beginnings of the church there.
And I think one of the other interesting things as far as background to the book goes is, to your point, so this book is being written, well downstream of the beginning of the church there when Paul first came through. And yet what things you're going to find as you read Philippians is that, Paul has maintained over the years a relationship with that group that is substantial, that they are a major financial patron of Paul's ministry, of his apostolic work. He will thank them for their multiple financial gifts. Through the years that have helped them out. And so that's interesting. As you stop and think about, he spent more time in Ephesus, he spent more time in Corinth, at least as far as we can tell from the book of Acts. And yet Philippi is a church where obviously Paul has somehow maintained a really tight relationship, and they have been majorly involved in his supporting his apostolic work.
And not just in terms of sending money, but you also have the messenger of that church, who seems at times to be a co-worker with Paul. You think that's right?
He definitely, obviously has a strong connection with Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus. Right, he obviously has a strong connection with him. Puts him, and again, you'll see this when you do your reading, chapter 2, we usually think about chapter 2 for that famous, some call it the Christ hymn, but that famous, we read before the Lord's Supper often. It's that great reflection on, but what Paul's subtly doing in chapter 2 is he's using not just Timothy, but Epaphroditus as examples of that spirit, ironically. So he holds Epaphroditus in high regard.
A guy that nearly dies.
Correct.
Laboring for the cause. And so I do think as you read the letter, you sense a warm relationship between Paul and the people there, not just in terms of what they did financially, but even the fact that some people from this group, this Epaphroditus was co-worker with him, and a man that I think Paul had great appreciation for. What about the background and the setting do you think impacts what he's saying in this letter?
Oh, that's a good question.
It feels like a really personal letter when I read it.
It is, and one of the things I think that you will find helpful is the background there. The play he makes off of citizenship, especially in chapter 3, and that issue, and our citizenship is in heaven. One of the things that's true of Philippi is that, unlike a lot of other Roman cities, this was a Roman colony whose inhabitants had Roman citizenship, and so that's why Paul will especially remind them about keeping straight their priorities of citizenship, because obviously in the Roman world, Roman citizenship was a big deal. Remember, Paul will even use that to save his life there in Jerusalem when he's about to be, beaten, and it's even how he appeals to Caesar to get to Rome, because he, as a Roman citizen, he had a right. You remember back earlier in the book of Acts when Paul appealed or first claims his Roman citizenship in Jerusalem when he's in trouble there and he's been taken, kind of captive by the Roman guards, the Roman soldiers. He's about to be flogged. He says, "Hey, I'm a Roman citizen. You can't do that." That
was a problem.
And the soldier on charge there, so to speak, kind of questions him about it. I bought my citizenship. Paul says, I was born that way. I come from Tarsus. So anyways, that was a big deal in the ancient Roman world. And so that actually becomes a subtle aspect of, the kind of sitting, I think, underneath some of what Paul's talking about in terms of not just explicitly in chapter 3, our citizenship is in heaven, but I think you can kind of read it against some of the other things earlier in the book as well. This finding humility. Doesn't matter if Jesus, being God, did not think that his perks and prerogatives as God were worth holding on to, when human salvation could be accomplished by him humbling himself. Read that against people who have Roman citizenship, some people in that church having Roman citizenship, that's, don't always hold on to your perks and prerogatives either. That can really hit hard in that regard as well.
That makes me think of chapter 3 as well, when Paul says, I had all these prerogatives as a Jew.
Correct.
That I was willing to forego.
Correct.
For the sake of gaining Christ, which is the thing.
So that whole idea of high status being renounced actually becomes a thing throughout the book.
Interesting. Well, okay, and so that's something to think about as you're reading this week, because when we get to week 2, we're going to talk about what is the big idea in the book. So as you read through, try to read through it every day and familiarize yourself with the content, but start pondering that next question we're going to be working with, and that is, what is the big idea in this letter? What's it all about? And then hop on the podcast next week, and we'll talk a little bit about that.